just like to introduce Dr. Hakim Yadi. He's a Chief Executive Officer of the Northern Health Science Alliance. He led the formation of this organisation and managed to secure over £60 million worth of contracts. Prior to this, he co-managed the translational medicine team at PA Consulting Group, where he was seconded to the UK government and became a founding member of the Department of International Trade Life Science Organisation. He's also a co-founder of 2 women's healthcare companies, holds a PhD in immunology and pregnancy from Cambridge University, and was awarded an OBE in the 2017 New Year's Honours List for services to healthcare technology and the economy. I'd just like to...
Thank you. Well, thank you, Helen. Thank you, James. Thank you all for inviting me here this morning. My name is Hakim Yadi, Chief Executive of the Northern Health Science Alliance, and today I'm going to talk to you about some of the larger issues going on in the life sciences and health innovation sector, both nationally, and then focus on some really exciting projects going on just in the northwest and wider across the north of England. But I thought I'd just start and just explain a bit about my journey going from the academic bench to where I am now. So I started life as an avid fan of biology and the natural world, and basically I'm here because I love David Attenborough programs and just found the whole world of zoology, biology fascinating. And went off to Bath to study an undergrad in biology, still with absolutely no idea what I was going to do with my degree. But I did do a placement year where I spent a year working for the biotech company UCB. When I started, it was actually called Celtech, and the day I joined was the announcement of the acquisition of the company. And as I walked down towards the front door of Celtech, there was someone scraping the name off the wall as UCB was being put up. So really interesting time in a company's life cycle. After that, and really based on some of the research that I did at UCB into autoimmunity, I ended up at Cambridge doing a PhD at the Babraham Institute, focused on women's health and looking at the molecular reasons behind preeclampsia and other associated disorders during pregnancy. And I was very fortunate to have done my PhD in a very commercial campus. So all of the core infrastructure, flow cytometry, imaging, stats, was all shared between companies and academics. So as you were going on to use a piece of kit, there'd be a company already be using it, and you'd get talking to those companies. And by the end of my PhD, I was doing bits of advisory work for some of the companies on site. And that's when I realized I was far more interested in the commercial application of life sciences than I was actually carrying on doing research. So I moved on to a consultancy company called IMS Health, where they did pricing and market access for new pharmaceuticals, working out how much to actually cost a pharmaceutical product and how much that differs between different countries. I didn't particularly enjoy working out how much to really get out of a system when it comes to new drugs, and wanted to get closer back to the innovation. I went to a company called PA Consulting, a technology consulting firm working on healthcare and life sciences projects, and ended up, as Helen said, being seconded out of the consultancy into UK government, what was then UK Trade and Investment, and now called the Department of International Trade, where I helped set up a unit called the Life Science Organisation, which was trying to promote UK life sciences to global partners. So around the world in our embassies, we've got staff who are actively talking with biotech companies, diagnostics companies, digital health companies, genomic sequencing companies, saying, come to the UK to do your research, come to the UK to do your development. So I was working with a team based out of Number 10 and UKTI to get the rest of the world to understand what it is we have. We've got great universities, we've got the NHS, we've also got a huge ecosystem of health innovation and life sciences. So I've had a sort of potted background of academia, of consultancy and business, and then exposure to policy. And that's what then drew me into the Northern Health Science Alliance, which I'll tell you more about over the course of my presentation. The life sciences and healthcare ecosystem in the UK is becoming ever more complicated. Historically, people used to talk about the ABC, the academe, the business and the clinical communities, each in their respective silos, each not fully appreciating what others do, how they work, what their priorities are, what their costs are. Now, I used to have this diagram with only those three, but now I include government because policy and the changes being made in government, particularly with Brexit, but looking at the 5-year forward view coming out from NHS England, policy, and we're actually in the biggest policy experiment of the world, really. The devolution of health to Manchester is probably one of the most exciting and important government interventions in health. To be able to understand the landscape, you do genuinely need to be able to understand the intricacies of what's happening in the industrial sector, what's happening in the NHS, what's happening in government, and what's happening in academia. And that's not just at the very top of those organisations, all the way down to the people who are doing the front line delivery in each of those. But navigating this is incredibly complex. No one person can really understand the whole ecosystem. Now, I'm a keen sailor, and I know what it's like when you're out in the open waters. You have to be very reactive. So if the wind conditions change, you have to react. If the captain tells you to tack, you tack. You don't ask questions. The boom will hit you in the face. Now, to be able to navigate an environment like that that is constantly changing, you need to be nimble. You need to be like one of these guys. You need to be able to be adapting to the environment around you and try to cross the finish line in one piece. The problem is that whilst we're all out there trying to react and trying to plan a way through this very intricate environment, we've got these guys. Big pharmaceutical companies, academic institutions, the NHS. When the captain decides to make a move in one of these, it can be miles before that 1 or 2 degrees is actually realised. So what we've got to be able to do is understand that there are small biotech companies, digital health companies, people innovating at the front line of the NHS, trying to behave like this alongside these guys. Now, we're not going to turn these huge tankers into swift little dinghies overnight. We have to appreciate that both have to operate in the same space. And that's why it's so important we need the whole ecosystem to work together. Focused on the patient, bringing together the academic, the business, the clinical communities. And very importantly in the UK, it's something that we often take for granted, is our medical and research charities. Cancer Research UK, being funded solely from the public purse in the UK, is the largest cancer funder in Europe. Shows you how important CRUK is to both the UK and academic and clinical collaborators across the world. And those medical research charities like Wellcome, like CRUK, can really help us understand what the patient unmet needs are, and then bring the right players, whether they come from the academic, the clinical or the commercial world, to innovate against them. Then the most important thing that we have at our disposal is the data that is driving all of this. We're blessed in the UK to have the NHS, to have an NHS ID number, cradle to grave, one number that follows you your whole life, linking all of the diagnostics, drugs, images you may have had. Now, why is that so special? Well, as we start to try and understand how disease progresses, we need to be able to go back before the identification of that disease. We need to be able to do large retrospective analysis of these data sets. And David from IBM is going to talk later around how we're starting to use artificial intelligence to do that. We are genuinely in a unique position that we all have our own ID number. If you turn to the US, for example, where you have a variety of different health insurers, people move between health insurers during their life. So if you had a cohort of 50,000 people that you were trying to study, the average turnover in the US is about 15% per year of moving between insurers. So in 5 years, if you started with a cohort of 50,000 people, you've lost them. In the UK, you can track a cohort throughout their whole life journey. And that's what the UK Biobank based in Stockport is doing. 500,000 healthy volunteers linking their genomics, metabolomics, other omics, behavioural information to their medical record and tracking them so that people can innovate against that data set. In the UK, there are a number of organisations, including my own, that are trying to pull all of these parties together. So in Scotland, we have NHS Research Scotland. In the north, we have the Northern Health Science Alliance, which I'll come on to. In the southeast, we have an organisation called MedCity that covers London, Cambridge and Oxford. In the southwest, GW4, Life Science Hub Wales, and a new emerging hub in Northern Ireland. We're all trying to do the same thing. We're trying to get the right people to have the right conversations outside of their silos to improve life sciences and health research in those particular geographies. Okay, so this has gone a bit askew, but what each of these organisations here on the left does, we all play a role in advocating for the UK, in shouting about the great research that's going on in our geography, both here in the UK with London and some of the key decision makers, but also internationally at some of the big trade conferences in the US, in Asia. Secondly, we act as an industry-facing broker, so we can sit down with a company and understand what their research interests are and say, well, that's interesting, you need to talk to this individual in Manchester, this individual in Sheffield, and this team in Newcastle to really get the right people to solve your problem. For companies, that is incredibly valuable because they often don't know who to go and talk to. We foster regional collaboration, trying to bring academics and clinicians and companies across the geographies that we work in together around really complex projects. Sometimes even within academia, people don't know who to collaborate with. We support inward investment, so this is when foreign companies want to come and put people, staff, teams into the UK. They often don't want to come into an environment that they don't know. They want to be able to know that they can talk with the NHS locally, talk with academics, know who the local businesses are. So we support them in understanding what the environment is they're coming into. And we have this sort of national or pan-national coverage when you look at the devolves of Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. And what we are all trying to do is join up the bench to bedside process. In the UK, we have two types of organisations that are trying to do this. The first are called the Academic Health Science Centres. There's one in Manchester, the Cambridge, Oxford, Imperial, UCL, King's. These are academic health science centres designated by the Department of Health and trying to translate early life sciences and clinical research into clinical practice. Now, whilst those are designated by the Department of Health, there are a number of what are termed shadow academic health science centres in Leeds, in Newcastle and Liverpool, who are just bringing the right people together anyway, and they're not designated by the Department of Health. Then secondly, we have 15 AHSNs, Academic Health Science Networks. And they're effectively trying to take what's been put into practice and scaling it across a geography. And that's why the Academic Health Science Networks cover the whole of the English footprint. In the north of England, there are 4, and I'll say a bit more about those later. But what we're trying to do is join up the whole process from bench to bedside, from practice into population through these different organisations. And most of the hospitals or academic institutions that you belong to will have some form of affiliation to either an academic health science network or an academic health science centre. The way I like to think about it is that we're going from an environment of academic insight and discovery where it's driven by hypotheses, that's taken it to the research bench. And then through industry, venture capital, funding coming from medical research charities, it gets commercialised and hopefully pulled back into the NHS, where you start to get first into man, experimental translational research. And then what you need to do is get it from bed to bedsides. And that's when you start to get towards population health. So effectively what the academic health science centres are doing is taking those early discoveries and taking them through. The academic health science networks are then pulling them into practice into the NHS. And that is the system that the UK has adopted to try and bring some of the technologies, tools, services, ideas that you will have at your disposal into practice across England. They've got priority areas, and they're not just doing this across the board. So the academic health science networks, for example, are focusing on cardiovascular disease, diabetes, long-term conditions, respiratory, patient safety, mental health. So they'll have programs, projects there where they are actively trying to identify here things that can be pulled through into practice in those areas, because these are the key areas that NHS England have identified that we need to be innovating against. And then they'll have enabling projects, the bedrock of what we need to be able to plug into, whether it's in terms of data, whether it's in terms of genomic medicine, the NHS England test beds, and the NHS Innovation Accelerator. It's all trying to join it up so we can go from discovery to implementation in the most smoothest way possible. So how are we doing this here in the north of England and in the northwest? So the Northern Health Science Alliance was set up back in 2010 by the chief executives of the 8 large teaching hospitals and the deans of the 8 medical schools from Lancaster, Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, Sheffield, Newcastle, Durham and York, as well as the 4 academic health science networks that are found in the north of England. So that's the North West Coast, Greater Manchester, Yorkshire and Humber, and North East and North Cumbria. And that brings together a 15 million patient population. 8 teaching hospitals, 8 universities, 4 academic health science networks, effectively a health innovation economy across the north of England. Now, when we did this work back in 2010, 2011, we started to map what is the actual scale of life sciences companies, of the health innovation economy of the north of England. Because most people outside the UK think that life sciences happens in Cambridge, Oxford and London. Well, when we did that mapping, we found there are 570,000 people working in the companies, the academic sector and the NHS in what we'd call life sciences. And there are 1,000 companies in the north of England employing 38,000 people in life sciences. No one had ever looked at it at the level of the north. They'd looked at it at the level of Manchester, they looked at the level of Newcastle, looked at the level of Leeds. But when you start to pull it all together, this is, dare I say the words, a northern powerhouse of health research and health innovation that we should all be very proud to be part of. So what we do as the Northern Health Science Alliance, we act as a pooled resource to shout about the north. So my team will be out there in the US, in Asia, talking to companies, talking to potential collaborators about the work that's being done by you and your colleagues across the northwest and the north of England to make sure that people think about the north when they're thinking about where to put a clinical trial, where to put a new centre of excellence, where to make an investment in the life sciences sector. We act as a collaborative network to bring the right people together to bid for funding. Sometimes you might not have all the expertise you need next to you. They might be in the next city or the next city over. What we can do by having that reach into the whole population of the north is pull the right people together for large complex projects, and I'll talk to one of those in a moment. As I said, we're actively driving sort of research traffic and inward investment towards the north, trying to get people, whilst they may fly into Heathrow, realise it's only a 2-hour train journey up to Manchester. And acting as an advocate and a champion for the north of England's health and life sciences ecosystem with government in particular. Now, some of you may have heard that the UK government's response to Brexit is to launch a series of industrial strategies. Not picking winners, but choosing whole sectors that they're looking to support. And the life sciences, our sector, was chosen as number 1. It's a 64 billion economy to the UK. Life sciences is being shouted about and promoted at all levels of government at the moment. And in the white paper that was launched last week by Greg Clark, the Minister in Bays, it said that further regional approaches, including in the north of England, would be delivered by the Northern Health Science Alliance, which we're really excited about. Earlier this week, I was fortunate enough to go to the launch of the Industrial Strategy for Life Sciences at number 10, where they've actually agreed that the next wave of the Industrial Strategy for Life Sciences will be done in the north of England, through us. This gives the north unparalleled access to new investment opportunities, new clinical trial opportunities, new investments from some of the big funding bodies across the UK. So this is what we're going to be focusing on over the next few months, and it got picked up in regional and national press. So that's what we do across the north of England, and the getting actually cited by the Life Sciences Industrial Strategy sector deal was really a bit of a coup for us, and it leaves 2017 on a real high, so we can go into 2018 really trying to grab hold of what that could mean for us. When I say we're going out there talking about the north, what are we actually saying? Well, we've mapped not only the companies but also the areas of expertise in the north of England. So what happens when you look at all of the different MRC, EPSRC, Wellcome funded institutes, NIHR infrastructures, clinical research facilities across the north? Where do our strengths sort of rise? The first is in what people refer to as precision medicine, sometimes termed as personalised medicine, sometimes termed stratified medicine, the idea of giving the right patient the right drug at the right dose at the right time, how we would all wish that we practice medicine on a daily basis. Healthy ageing, Newcastle leads the country, they're the National Centre of Excellence for Healthy Ageing. Population and digital health through some of the work that we're doing on a project called Connected Health Cities that I'll come on to. And really underpinned by our clinical trials research and the ability to deliver the health economic understanding of how these technologies are going to impact the system. Are they going to cost more? Are they going to cost less? What efficiency savings can be realised by these technologies over the long run? Now, when we did the mapping of all of the strengths across the north, something we found out. The north of England does more clinical trials than the Golden Triangle. Most people, when I tell them in London, don't believe that. But we do. We deliver more clinical research than the Golden Triangle. Newcastle is the best performing NHS trust in the country for clinical research. Manchester is the most commercially led clinical research facility in the country. Manchester does more clinical trials sponsored by industry than anywhere else in England. We are really, truly ahead of the pack here, and it's about shouting about what we do to make sure that people hear and respond by putting their investment and their research alongside us. We've also got a number of national centres, so not too far away from here at Alderley Park, we have something called the Medicines Discovery Catapult. This is funded by an organisation called Innovate UK, and it brings together academics, businesses, researchers, clinical scientists to look at how we're going to discover the new medicines of the future. Genomics England, the 100,000 Genomes Project, we've got centres across the north of England. And in the northeast, a real unsung gem, the CPI, the Centre for Process Innovation. They're looking at the processes that are going to need to be changed in terms of life sciences, pharmaceuticals manufacturing, and the next generation of technologies like using light and photonics to treat new medicines. So we've got a number of real national assets in the north as well that we can plug into that innovation environment I just mentioned. Now, why would the north of England and institutions that have historically competed against each other, who as soon as the league tables come out are working out to see if they beat the other one, collaborate? Why would the Dean of Medicine of Newcastle want to collaborate with the Chief Executive of Manchester's teaching hospital? It's because we have a North-South divide in health outcomes. And it's not a challenge that actually applies to any one city, it sadly applies to the whole of the north. So if you look at the UK Health Atlas and look at the epidemiology and burden of disease in liver cancer, lung cancer, heart disease and COPD, and those of you canny enough will realise that being dark orange is not a good thing. We have a tale of two Englands, one that has a higher life expectancy and one that has a lower life expectancy. A young girl born in Richmond in London today versus a young girl born in Bradford can expect a difference of having 15 years, 1-5, healthy life just by being born in the southeast. That's terrifying. So the north has come together to innovate to try and address this. Some research published in the British Medical Journal earlier this summer, I won't go into the details of this. This is an infographic we've done to condense the BMJ article. I can share it around later, the infographic. But the headline is that of the 25 million people living across the north of England, over 1 million have died earlier than their southern counterparts in the last 50 years. 1 million northerners have died younger than they should have just by being born in the north of England. That is something that I don't think we can really carry on with. And so these institutions, the academic and the clinical institutions from across the country, in the north in particular, are trying to address this through research, innovation and partnership. So how do we solve such a massive health inequality? Partnerships. And for me, Formula One is the greatest example of a partnership. You've got the driver there, but you've got the whole team on the track side. Data is streaming in real time from the driver in the car, both to the track side, the team back in Woking for McLaren, and information is being shared. Lewis Hamilton may win the race, but actually it's done in partnership, with everyone from fixing the bolt on the tyres all the way through to the decisions made on the track. Partnerships are the only way of addressing such a massive health inequality. So I'm going to give two examples of two really interesting partnerships that have been happening in the north and the northwest. The first one, the Sulfur lung study, some of you may be aware of. The second is a project called Connected Health Cities, where partnerships and the sharing of information, data, science is really starting to have a local, regional and national impact. So for those of you that don't know, the Sulfur lung studies are two studies, one in asthma and one in COPD, funded by GlaxoSmithKline. And GSK looked around the world to try and identify the most appropriate site to do a real-world clinical trial. They looked across the whole planet, and Sulfur was the best place. It's quite staggering. But it's because of the maturity, the digital maturity of Salford Royal and the partnerships they had in place with local GP practices and local pharmacies. So it was two late phase randomized controlled trials sponsored by GSK. GSK put the best part of $100 million into Salford to run these studies. And they reported out this summer, both positive. One in, one was certainly in New England Journal of Medicine. The team that ran the Salford lung study on behalf of GSK are called NorthSouth Divide. They're based at City Lamps in Manchester, and they've given me permission to present some of the work they're doing today. We work very closely with them, and what we're trying to do is scale what they've done in Salford across the north of England. So the normal evaluation of a new clinical asset is anywhere from sort of 12 to 15 years. That's going from discovery, going through phase 1, phase 2, all the way through into practice, where you need to look at efficacy and effectiveness and base that on what's happened in discovery, in clinical development, in pharmacovigilance, and build a package of information that then goes to the regulators to get that through. And then you need to provide that evidence to payers to make sure that you can get it through the system. So in the UK it would be NICE. So the Salford lung study sat between these two environments. So it was pre and post-market surveillance. So what the Salford team did through NorthSouth Health, they used a tool called Farsight, which is effectively a data asset where they've pulled data information from across the Salford area, 800,000 medical records in Salford, 1.2 million across the north of England. And they can interrogate that data set to identify patients for clinical trials. So you can put in your inclusion and exclusion criteria for a clinical trial and identify how many patients there are in the area that would be suitable for that clinical trial. That's a really useful piece of information. Doing a feasibility study to understand if someone is going to be eligible for a clinical trial can take months. Being able to automate the whole process purely based on the electronic medical records that I spoke about earlier is an amazing tool. What they can then do is identify where those patients are, which GP practices locally. And then they can alert the GP to say, you have a patient that's eligible for a clinical trial. Would you like to enroll them or find out more information? Now, this isn't something that just can happen here locally. I was with the team from NorthSouth Health in San Diego last year with a biotech company looking for a cohort of patients with pancreatic cancer. And in real time, behind the N3, the team from NorthSouth Health sat down with a biotech company in San Diego and found 12 patients in Manchester suitable for their trial. That company then spent the next few months working with NorthSouth Health to try and recruit those patients into the trial. So when I'm saying we go out there and we talk about the assets we've got, this is the sort of thing that gets a biotech company in San Diego thinking that they should be doing their clinical trial in Salford. So this tool, for example, with the classic study that they ran, recruited 4,500 people in 16 weeks. A phenomenal recruitment rate for an observational study. So how have they done this, and what have they done? So they built a platform that integrates lots of different data sets. So they draw in data from the Exeter dataset, NHS Digital, all of the 140 GP practices across the region, pharmacies from across the region to understand whether or not the drugs have actually been prescribed and collected, out of hours, a small ECRF, EHRs, PAS, community services, and they use all of that information to inform the safety, the study data, and the regulatory. And critically, they were able to actually run the whole clinical trial in terms of managing its performance using this data platform. Now, normally, in terms of data for a clinical trial, you should be able to access, in theory, all the retrospective data from your electronic medical record and all the prospective data. And it would sit here, very small data footprint. The data footprint for the Sulfur lung study was quite broad, was much broader than most clinical studies. But actually, the data footprint that anyone could have, if you really had access to electronic medical records, would be the life cycle, or sorry, the life journey of that individual and all of the interventions they'd had. And that's the data potential to drive the future of clinical trials. So what they're doing now is they're taking all of the things they already had, because they know how to do that, they've run it, they've proven it, it's been published, both studies have been effective, and saying, what next? So this is where they're starting to bring in wearables, artificial intelligence, omics data, Internet of Things, and imaging data to make this an unrivaled data set for conducting clinical research. At the moment, as I say, it's across 1 million patients across the north of England, and we're working with them to try and get that data footprint expanded across the north of England. And if anyone wants to go through the Life Sciences Industrial Strategy that was published back in August, you will see that data and information access run throughout the whole strategy. This is the direction of travel for health innovation and life sciences research in the UK. What we want to be able to do is take that data and go from a system like this into one like this. Use the information to do faster recruitment, better inform the clinical trial, monitor patients in the real world to work out if those drugs are actually working. If we can reduce the innovation timeline, we can bring in huge cost savings, both for the NHS, but also then to the pharmaceutical industry, and potentially reduce the cost of the drugs when they come to market, because time is the biggest challenge in terms of the overall cost profile of a new molecule. So that's one really exciting project happening a stone throw away from here, and really is directing the future of what's happening in life sciences and health research across the North and the UK. The second is a project called Connected Health Cities, linked but not quite identical. We all know that when we're ill, we will have an interaction with the NHS or a local care provider, but that's not the only interaction you have that might have a link to your health. If it's around a lifestyle disorder, you may have other interactions with the city that you live in, whether it's through accessing the gym, whether it's going to the pharmacy, whether it's accessing any number of different public sector services. Do you walk or do you take the bus? Could we use that information to build a better picture of how we look after someone's care? So for example, if we've got a city like Manchester that's aiming to become a smart city and better monitor air pollution, could we inform people with respiratory disorders on a daily basis that you shouldn't take that route to work, you should take this route to work because of the lower pollution levels? How do we actually better help people manage their own conditions by using the information that is currently already being collected but not integrated? So the idea behind Connected Health Cities is to link these sorts of data sets in a suitably anonymised way, being led very much by citizens and patients, to inform new models of care. And that is what Connected Health Cities is. It's about bringing together people, data and methods to influence change. Now, whenever I talk about Connected Health Cities, people say it's a data project. I don't think it is. I think it's a people project. Because if the people aren't willing to collaborate and form a partnership and share, you're never going to get the flow of information to allow you to get access to the data to generate new methods that may actually allow you to change care pathways. What we're trying to do is move from a one-size-fits-all system of siloed commissioning, quality intelligence, public health intelligence, social care management, research and innovation data, to one where it's all integrated into what we call an arc. So across 4 different cities in the north of England, we're taking 2 care pathways per city and trying to transition them from this space into this one. Very much led by public involvement. You will have all seen care.data make the front pages of the Daily Mail. We don't want another scenario like that. So what we have been doing is running citizens' juries across the north of England, debating the use of healthcare data with citizens to understand how they want us to use their data to better inform and plan care across the north. So let me just talk you through the idea of what we're trying to create with an ARC. So as citizens in whichever city or region we live in, we create a number of public sector encounters, and we're creating data all the time that's being stored. Some people refer to this as our digital exhaust. You don't see it, it's all behind you, but you are creating it through every interaction you have with a public sector service. We want to bring that data together in an ARC, and each of the ARCs are led by citizens. So we have lay public members, part of the ARC, actually helping us and informing us on how we should do this. We bring together the problem owners, and by problem owners I mean effectively clinicians, looking at the NHS and understanding what the problems are, not creating new technologies that we are forcing on the system, sitting down and working with the NHS to understand what the challenges are and innovate against them. The data managers, public health analysts, statisticians, social scientists, health economists, communications experts, all working together to improve health and social care in a city. We then have relationships with the different institutes funded by the Medical Research Council, NIHR, to do some of the innovation alongside there. We have a spin-in, spin-out laboratory where small companies, large companies can work in a suitable, anonymised way with those data to validate technologies they already have or work with us to co-create new technologies. And we're in the process of pulling together a pre-competitive consortium of a number of companies who are going to be working alongside us here. The end goal is that this leads to insights that informs service planning and policy, that goes back to inform the services that give the people, the citizens of these cities, a better access to care and care management. In each of the different cities across the north, they're tackling different pathways, and they sat down for the best part of a year to look at which pathways they were going to tackle. Here in Manchester, they're looking at stroke and antimicrobial resistance. In Liverpool, if you think back a few slides, they're looking at alcohol misuse. Up in the northeast, they're looking at respiratory disease. And in Yorkshire, one of them is looking at childhood obesity and life course management of that. We're looking at problems that those cities wanted to focus on, but we're also making sure that none of the cities do the same challenge. There isn't enough funding to go around for everyone to tackle every problem. So what we want to be able to do is get these cities to learn from one another. So if Newcastle does do something amazing in better management of respiratory conditions, Manchester should be able to learn from that. Leeds should be able to learn from Manchester in terms of better management of overprescribing of antibiotics. And for me, the most interesting part of this project is not so much the actual projects going on in each city. It's the fact that people are willing to partner up and say, we can't tackle that, we're going to focus on this area. You go away and do that, but when you're finished, we want to know about it and we want to copy you. And in that way, we can actually start to address that health inequality between the north and south. Not tackling everything all at once, but cherry picking and learning and sharing and copying. This whole idea behind using data in this way is based on a series of papers on something what's known as a learning health system. This paper in particular, combining health data uses to ignite health system learning, is one of the underpinning articles that is available free by Ainsworth and Buchan from the University of Manchester, that if you wanted to understand more about connected health cities, I can make that paper available to you all. And on that, I'll finish. The North has got, as I hope you've heard today, a really vibrant life sciences ecosystem. We're doing some pioneering work using data, whether it be in Sulfur or connected health cities. And hopefully it starts to expose people to other areas where your careers can develop where you need that understanding of clinical sciences, but it can be taken into other domains, whether it's in public policy, whether it's working alongside industry, or whether it's working like I do as a facilitator between the different silos that exist across health and life sciences. So thank you very much.
Right, thank you, Hakim, for that very interesting talk. Now I've got time for questions. I just want to we've got one at the back already.
Have you felt the impact of Brexit in terms of trying to recruit people to do their clinical trials here from places that are in Europe?
So, yes, very bluntly. So the day after Brexit, I was called up by one of the investors from the US that we were working with and said, our investment decision is on hold. And they haven't contacted us since. Actually, in Manchester, there was a team that was going to be recruited from one of the top tier universities in the US. He was going to bring his whole lab over. He decided not to because he wanted to do European science, not UK science. So we have felt the impact and we are feeling the impact. And that's why the life sciences strategy has been put together to say, we're still here, we're still open for business, these are our assets, come and work with us. Because what people don't like is the uncertainty. The 2 years of the negotiations mean that people don't quite know, are we going to sit in or out of the different regulatory frameworks? Where's the EMA going? It's that uncertainty that is putting people off. I don't think long term it will have the impact that everyone's worried about, but in the short term it is having an impact.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I just wondered, alongside all this increase in data, how is it being managed with data protection, and whether that's being looked after? Is the kind of consideration of that happening alongside?
So it's been looked after nationally. So Dame Fiona Caldecott is leading the processes around data governance, data access, and so any of the things that I've just been talking about have to align to data privacy and data access regulations that are being put in place at the moment. The key thing is around actually working locally and getting people to understand how their data is already being used and how it might be used in the future. A lot of the people that were engaged through the citizens' juries actually assumed their data was being used already. They assumed that the GP practice was sharing data with their secondary care and was sharing practice with their social care, and none of it was happening. So there's actually a level of understanding by the public on what is being used and how it should be used, versus where we're trying to get to as well. So there's both an education of the system, the public, but making sure we stick to the guidelines.
Anyone else? Yes.
In these extended frameworks of collaboration, what happens to intellectual property, and how does one, if a discovery is made and a product realised, what happens to that within the collaboration?
So it's a great question. It really depends on the maturity of the idea. So in most cases, you might have a company or an entrepreneur coming with a piece of technology that has already got its patents in place and coming into the system to validate it. So they think it does something, does it actually do it in the real world? In that case, the IP, the background intellectual property is going to reside with the company or with the innovator in question. But there may then be some co-creation that happens, and that's when you can start to co-develop intellectual property with them. With the pre-competitive consortium we're putting together for Connected Health Cities, this is something we're looking at actively at the moment, because some of the IP we create together could have a huge impact on health and social care. It could be an algorithm, it could be a piece of hardware, it could be a piece of software. But all of it is normally dealt with up front to understand if this is something where there is pre-existing IP, that it's a validation and there's no real issue. The real issue comes in terms of co-creation and then understanding who actually did the most of that co-creation. But Dave, maybe when you speak later around some of the IBM efforts, you can mention that.
Anyone else? Last question? Oh yeah.
You said about the benefits of collaboration between all these institutions. Let's say that the specific one can do pretty much all the work by its own. What's the incentive of collaborating with everyone else? Where the whole thing could just fall apart when you have so many people working from different locations and possibly different time zones?
Some places do have all the necessary pieces of the jigsaw, and they just go it alone. So you have to understand what the mutual benefits are of the collaboration before you get into it. So there have been a number of cases of some of the projects, some that I haven't spoken about today, where we brought everyone into a room and someone said, you know what, we're not going to join, because actually we're going to do it alone. But the other members of the consortium recognise the value of having that. You have to be able to recognise the value going in. And so a lot of the work that goes into setting things like this up is understanding that there is going to be a mutual benefit. So to set up the Northern Health Science Alliance, before any work actually began, there was 2 years of discussions to make sure we had the right partners in the room and make sure that people were willing to collaborate.
In those 2 years, be better spent actually doing the work than putting the group together.
Well, the work doesn't stop. So everyone else is still going on and delivering. But in those 2 years, we realised we got the right partners together. We brought in £60 million worth of funding for health sciences and clinical research as a result of that partnership that wouldn't have come in without us. So there is a definite benefit of mutual collaboration, but you just need to make sure you've got the right partners and the right understanding of who's bringing what to the table when you set up the collaboration. Yeah, it's an art, not a science.
Thanks, Hakim. Thanks for a really interesting talk about Northern